Wow, did you guys catch that? The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives just said in an interview that in at most 2 weeks, trillions in new capital could flow into Bitcoin and crypto here. Let's take a look at why. Plus, something just happened that could lead to almost every U.S. citizen holding Bitcoin in the future. That's honestly shocking. And now we've got the next billionaire fund manager and asset manager making a massive Bitcoin turnaround, going from critic to Bitcoin bull and on the verge of making huge Bitcoin purchases. But before we dive in, let's smash that like button down below for all-time highs and higher Bitcoin prices. Interest in Bitcoin right now is actually really low. You can see it. People have other things on their minds. Even the Bitcoin price is just moving sideways. Nothing significant is really happening. All the more reason to smash that like button down below right now. But on the other hand, we also have to say that we're holding steady here, and these sideways periods are always really important in the long run. We're now seeing some serious stability in the Bitcoin price, with less volatility. In the long run, that's going to attract even more investors. Volatility has always been the thing that scared a lot of people off here. And the Bitcoin therapist puts it perfectly. The long-term goal is to own more Bitcoin than your neighbor, your friend, and your enemies. Whoever has the biggest stack wins. Don't let your surroundings distract you. Focus on the Bitcoins. That's all. I wouldn't necessarily agree here that you need to have more Bitcoin than your neighbor or whatever. You don't have to compare yourself to other people, but of course the goal should be to accumulate more Bitcoin, to gain more freedom, and for that, these sideways phases are just brilliant. And now something has actually happened that will, in the future, turn every US citizen into a Bitcoin holder. And then we also have the trillions that are coming into the Bitcoin market. Let's take a look at the whole thing now, right? First, here's the statement from the US House of Representatives, from the chairman, right? He's making a very strong statement here. Check this out. And we'll take a look at what this means for Bitcoin afterwards.
In the middle of making crypto policy for the United States of America, you have an upcoming crypto week. Tell us about that.
Well, right now, digital assets, cryptocurrency, and everything related to using financial payments on a blockchain is basically not regulated, not clear to consumers, investors, entrepreneurs how to use it, how to avoid federal prosecution. So in 2 weeks, we'll bring to the House floor the Clarity Act, which gives the rules of the road of how to invest in digital assets, how to trade them, how you can be a broker, and the market framework for digital assets. It will also bring to the House floor dollar-backed payment stablecoins, which we believe those two things will advance America's power around the world in financial services by extending.
And here it's already being commented, trillions will flow into Bitcoin. Here's the comment again. Here it is again, trillions are coming. And it's simply due to what he's saying here, that the markets aren't as well regulated as they should be yet. And this market structure, these new regulations, will lead to even more capital flowing into the market. And all of this will take place during Crypto Week, where various topics will be looked at, and among them, regulation will be improved again. I mean, ideally, the best is always as little regulation as possible, and the best case maybe even no regulation at all. But yeah, we still have the fiat system, which wants to regulate, which also wants to have a bit of control. And then, at least, it's better to have less regulation than to have more regulation. You also always have to keep in mind, when things like this come up, new laws, new bills, and so on, the money, of course, doesn't flow straight into Bitcoin right away. Then some people write in the comments, yeah, so what now? 2 weeks have passed. You said in 2 weeks things would kick off? So where's the pop now? These are processes that just take another half a year. Sometimes it can take 2 or 3 years before the capital actually flows in. But in the long run, we know that more and more doors are opening, more and more gates, capital gates, are opening, also with the treasury companies, where the bond market is being tapped into. Now, new entrepreneurs are being addressed here. With the ETFs, new customers are being targeted. With banks, new customers are being approached again. That means we have so many new levers, so many new doors that are being opened all the time. And now you really have to pay close attention, not sleep through all of this. And the next thing that's happening here is absolutely huge, and you shouldn't sleep on that either. You really have to pay close attention here too, because I'm going to explain to you what's happening behind the scenes. And most people, they only look at the Bitcoin price, and then they're surprised later on when the Bitcoin price suddenly breaks out and they're not in the game, because they always think, yeah, it's boring. It's just moving sideways or whatever. You really have to understand what's going on behind the scenes here. And that's what's so crazy about this. Check this out. Every child born here between 2025 and 29 will get $1,000 from tax money, and this will be invested into the S&P 500. And this was part of the big beautiful bill, but it kind of slipped under the radar. I only noticed it myself afterwards. And now a lot of Bitcoiners here have picked up on this, because it would mean that all newborn children here will hold Bitcoin in the future, since we can pretty much assume that strategy will soon be listed in the S&P 500. Of course, at first these will probably just be small allocations. The kids won't have a big Bitcoin exposure, but at least they'll have a little exposure to Bitcoin. And there was a really, really interesting take on this from Josh Mendel, who said, hey, this is the best reason to include strategy in the S&P 500. I've long been convinced that inclusion is the most likely way to diversify the portfolios of millions of Americans who would otherwise never buy Bitcoin themselves. Now I see the answer to my hopes and dreams, of all things. With big, beautiful pictures, a newborn child earns Bitcoin for free. Well, I don't know if you really need it for free, because that's just another redistribution mechanism. You take from some and then give Bitcoin to others. At least that's maybe better than just giving them dollars or euros or something like that. But redistribution is never really beneficial, but he does make a very, very good point here. That's a really, really strong argument for strategy. Of course, that's also a really great argument for all the Bitcoin critics who say Bitcoin will never catch on, you know. And now let's assume that in the future we'll have even more of these treasury companies, other businesses for example. Adam Back says that in the future there won't be a Magnificent Seven anymore, but only the Bitcoin Magnificent Seven. That means all the top companies worldwide will be replaced by Bitcoin treasury companies. Either old companies that jump on the Bitcoin bandwagon, or new companies that will overtake the old ones, like Strategy or Metaplanet and many others. And that's exactly what, for example, Adam Back, who was already mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper, calls information asymmetry. These are pieces of information that, firstly, the regular market doesn't even understand, and secondly, probably hasn't priced in yet. I mean, there are still people who say everything is already priced in, blah, blah, blah. I'm actually not so sure about that, because if all the information, all the news that's constantly happening here, everything I report on, if all of that were already priced in, I mean, then the Bitcoin price wouldn't be at 110,000 US dollars, or just under 100,000 US dollars. The Bitcoin price would be way, way higher already. That's also what people sometimes criticize in the comments. Why isn't the Bitcoin price higher? Well, it's simply because a lot of people just don't get it. We had another street interview here this weekend as well. I'm currently here in Austria and on. I have to say, this time there were actually some really impressive people there. People who said, hey, I bought Bitcoin with leverage, on credit, I went all in on Bitcoin. I know that I probably never have to work again. There were people who said, hey, I have 2 Bitcoin, I have 3 Bitcoin. There were people who said, hey, please bleep this out. I have so many Bitcoin, you can't even publish that here. Please bleep it out. Of course, it's not always smart to tell people how much Bitcoin you have, but some people just always want to tell others how much Bitcoin they own. And of course, many people weren't really aware of the power of Bitcoin, most of them, but at least there are more and more people you actually meet who really know about Bitcoin. A year ago, or 2 years ago, that was definitely much less the case. And now check this out, the next critic, who is now in the Bitcoin camp and is also on the verge of possibly making very, very large Bitcoin allocations, with billions in assets under management. Dr. Erhard was interviewed by Mark Friedrich, and he shared some very, very interesting things. Take a look at this.
We've already talked about gold. Now I'd like to talk to you about digital gold. I gave you my new book about Bitcoin. Have you ever considered Bitcoin as a possible investment opportunity for your funds, for your clients?
Yes, we've looked into it, but haven't done anything yet. I was terribly slow with that, I have to admit, and I probably shouldn't have been. But I also didn't think it would catch on like this. I thought it was more of a thing that would be popular for a while, and then people would say, well, there's no real substance behind it, and no real returns either. I mean, there are no interest payments or dividends either. So why should I absolutely have Bitcoin now? But because of this enormous surge, it has attracted a lot of investors. And also the fact that Trump has backed it, and that the big American firms, despite people like Jamie Dimon and others, who at first said, yeah, no, better not, and so on, have gotten involved. But yeah, suddenly they came out with ETFs. And with ETFs, it's now really easy to invest in Bitcoin today. And because of things like that, it has become very well known. And not just well known, but also widespread, you know. So, for example, 50% more Americans own Bitcoin than gold. So it's very widespread. And the more widespread it becomes, the more it turns into a self-fulfilling story. And then it's here to stay. You just can't imagine it going away anymore. It's that simple, you know. I used to think that this was just a reflection of the whole global wave of inflation that was triggered by the central banks to bridge the recession. And all that liquidity has to go somewhere. So it also flows into Bitcoin. And when things eventually return to normal, then it all just collapses like a balloon. But that's wrong, simply because too many people now believe in it. And they also say that it's limited to 21 million units. That's why it actually is an inflation hedge. So just because of that, I think the whole attitude of humanity towards Bitcoin has changed. And the more people get behind it, not just governments, but like in America, even the president, and also the broad investor public, the more I believe that, in the long run, simply because of its scarcity, the price will probably go up.
So you mean you would also include it in your portfolio because...
I'm considering it. I'm thinking about it. But so far I haven't done it yet, as I said. And at the beginning I said, well, if I ever get the idea, it's probably already too late. That was really right at the very beginning. When no one even knew about Bitcoin, I thought maybe it will keep going after all, or we were kind of hesitating. But I always say, I have a responsibility when it comes to investing money. And if there's no backing from substance or earning power, like with a stock or a bond, then I'd rather not buy it. With gold, at least you have something that's actually needed, so to speak, also in industry and jewelry, and not just as an investment. You can definitely include gold more often, but with Bitcoin, I never really dared to. But I think it's different today, because it's so widespread, the likelihood that it'll just disappear like a bubble isn't really there anymore. I think it will probably still fluctuate, probably even more than other investments. So the question is whether you should get in right now. But in the end, I really think more and more people are getting interested in it, and will just include it as a liquid alternative. What can you do? Well, you can just hold dollars as a kind of fixed deposit, as liquid intellectual money, as an international investor, not just from a German perspective. Or you can also just treat Bitcoin as liquidity, set it aside and say, well, it's probably not as affected by inflation as the dollar, which keeps getting printed by the American Central Bank, or the euro by the ECB. So in that respect, it's probably going to keep its place among investment vehicles and not be like a comet, something that's favored for a while and then disappears again.
So you can definitely see here, you can't ignore the topic of Bitcoin anymore. And you can also see that people who got in very, very early are being rewarded. And you can also, for example, easily outperform fund managers like Mr. Earhart here, simply by having, well, the arbitrage advantage. That means, if you get involved now, you're getting in earlier than many fund managers who might only wake up to this in 2, 3, 5, or even 10 years. I mean, a lot of people have already figured it out, BlackRock, Larry Fink, and so on. Many big players have really understood it, and I also get the feeling that especially wealthy people are totally on top of it. Every rich person I know has already dealt with Bitcoin in some way, but many people who maybe don't have as much wealth, not so much. And that's why it's really, really important to get into this topic as quickly and as early as possible. That way, you can actually manage to outperform these people in the long run simply through information arbitrage. You can also move up the wealth pyramid here, and that's the incredible power of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the ultimate savings vehicle, and on top of that, we still have the chance to become part of Bitcoin before the window of opportunity closes and all the big asset managers and major players are in Bitcoin. That's absolutely amazing, and that's why I highly, highly recommend, if you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link below for T21 Bitcoin. Here you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply use the code Bitcoin to get up to 20% off the fees when purchasing Bitcoin. And also, very, very important, if you want a hardware wallet, I'll also put a link below for the TREZOR hardware wallet, definitely one of the best hardware wallets on the market, open source. It's absolutely essential to keep your Bitcoin in safe custody, not leave it on exchanges. Guys, write to me below. Oh, and by the way, with the code Bitcoin you also get a discount. I'll put the link for you down below as well. And yes, let me know in the comments below what you think about these statements. Guys, see you next time. Until then, peace out.